have Ambassador Tibor, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs from 2018 to 2021. He has served as a United States ambassador in many African countries, very familiar with the continent, many of its issues, and a great friend of Somaliland. Today, we want to talk to him about specifically about some of the issues that are going on in the region, but more importantly about the memorandum of understanding that Ethiopia and Somaliland have signed, and the potential implication that it has for the region and indeed the world. I have Siham Moomin as a co-host and Abdel Nasser. So today our format is going to be a little bit different. Unfortunately, we're not going to open up for general questions. We have some questions that we've actually had audiences sent ahead of time. So we want to keep things really moving a little bit more focused. So I apologize. We're not going to be having like questions from the public, other than the ones that were already submitted, to be fair for the ones that actually put in the effort. Ambassador, thank you very much, and I want to dive right into it since we lost a little bit of time. And I want to get your take on, in general, how do you actually view this memorandum of understanding between Somaliland and Ethiopia? Ambassador Najay, you are muted, so go ahead and unmute yourself. But right now you're a speaker, so you should be able to go ahead and speak. Thank you. Guys, I apologize. We seem to be having some technical difficulties with the spaces, but we should be going soon. Siham and Abdel Nasser, anything you can do to get things going, go right ahead.
I think we should play the national anthem while we wait.
I agree. Let's go.
Let's do that.
Ambassador Najee, looks like you're back. You can accept patient to speak. Ambassador, if you have the Twitter application on your phone, it's actually, I think, much easier than it is on the web browser. So you may want to try that. Okay, Ambassador, it looks like you're back, and now you're a speaker. So if you can unmute yourself, you are good to go. As soon as you do that, we will get right into it. Everyone, we apologize, but looks like we're getting there, so bear with us. We appreciate your patience. Thank you. Siham and Abdinasir, can we unmute the ambassador? Is there a way we can do that, as the host?
I think the problem, Said, is he's joining from a web cam, and he has, that's the issue.
Okay.
Or we're being reported. I don't know, either one.
I ask all the listeners to share this space because we need to reach a lot of people. Zaida, you're on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Mal, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe we could take some questions. Maybe we could.
Yes, we should definitely do that when we get this sorted out. Yeah, let's get it going. Actually, I see Mr. Hamza Khaire from the opposition party. He actually did have a fantastic question, and we can actually get that going.
We
In the
follow the
meantime,
format developed by Somaliland Chronicle, so we wait Said to speak and then we will proceed.
Hello.
oh, hey, Mr.
Yes, I
Ambassador
hear you.
Nagy, fantastic.
Okay,
Thank
you
you.
guys, you just unmuted me.
Oh, I did.
Yeah, we
It
just
looks like we
unmuted you
have
because
everybody
I saw
actually.
that you were
We have
muted.
everybody.
So we are
Yeah.
sorry. We give you apology about that. So we want us to hear from Said.
Okay, Ambassador Najay, and
I think someone
this is for everybody.
muting Ambassador Tibor.
This is for everybody. We are having a technical difficulties. So it looks like we've actually unmuted everyone. In the meantime, if you can actually, keep the noise levels really down, so we can actually get this show on the road. Ambassador, welcome and thank you very much for joining us. I actually want to get the first question right out to you as quickly as possible because we've lost a little bit of time. So we want to talk about the memorandum of understanding that was signed by Ethiopia and Somaliland. What's your general sense? How do you actually view this? Is this a good deal? Is it a bad deal? And just tell us about what you think about it.
Okay, I'll try and answer it again. Hopefully this time it'll go through. Okay, I mentioned this possibility a couple of months ago on my Twitter account because at that time everyone, when Ethiopia was voicing the necessity for a port and everyone was saying, oh my gosh, this is going to be a new conflict in the Horn between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And I said, that makes no sense whatsoever. There doesn't need to be a conflict because there is an ideal solution, which is the de facto country of Somaliland, which has phenomenal port facilities. And it would be a natural partnership for Ethiopia to make a deal with Somaliland. So I think it is an ideal opportunity for both countries. It's perfect for a long-term relationship, and it's perfect for developing infrastructure from the port in Somaliland into Ethiopia. So, when I was in Somaliland a little over a year ago, I had a chance to visit the port facilities in Berbera, and I saw the new road that's being constructed. And Ethiopia desperately needs a long-term relationship. It cannot put all of its, eggs in the basket of Djibouti. So, from my point of view, this is perfect for the two countries, and it's also perfect for the long-term stability and prosperity of the Horn of Africa.
Thank you, Ambassador. So that's actually a pretty good, concise, and the fact that you've actually seen the infrastructure that are actually coming up in Somaliland in preparation for not just for Ethiopia but the world in general, right? It's actually kind of getting there. I want to fire the next question right at you as quickly as possible, so again we can get this going. So this deal, I mean, it almost one can say it came out of nowhere. Nobody really expected it. And as you know, deals between countries take a very long time in terms of preparation and discussions that have to actually happen for things to take shape. But again, in all honesty, like this, the memorandum of understanding was pretty sudden and actually has surprised everyone. What do you think prompted the two leaders of Somaliland and Ethiopia to do so? And do you see any circumstances that led to this level of urgency in actually getting an understanding and kind of surprising everyone, if you will?
Yeah, well, Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia has had a track record of surprising people. When all of a sudden he made peace with Eritrea shortly after coming to power. And remember, when you say deal, this is just step one, because a memorandum of understanding is fairly easy to sign, because what that is, it's simply an intention. So now gets the really, really hard part. That's going to take a while to hammer out all the details, and as we say, crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's. But this to me is fairly it's fairly evident of how Prime Minister Abiy has been, and no doubt there have been some discussions in the background. We can be assured that this wasn't just all of a sudden done. One morning, the Prime Minister Abiy calls up President Bihi and says, "Hey, let's make a deal on this." So I'm sure there's been some discussion, but like I said, an MoU is only step one, and there's more steps to go.
Now, just following up on that, and you're right, like, an MOU is just the beginning phase of a, long-term discussion. Now, Somaliland hasn't, kind of forged, this type of relationship before. Ethiopia may have, but again, both of them might not be to the level of, like, say, the United States, that actually has, whether it's, an agreement to place forces in a foreign country. Are there agreements such as the status of forces agreement that could be a template for both countries to try to figure out and get this kind of thing going?
Yeah, sure, because there's status of forces agreements all around the world between a number of countries. Whether you go from the United States to China, to Russia, to the French, the British, uh, Kenya, others. So yeah, there's lots of models to use, but the key is to figure out what the interest of the two countries, and kind of circle around that. It's agreements between countries are nothing more than Venn diagrams, and it's where the intersection is between the interests of the various participants, and then you draw around there, and you put it into a document that everybody agrees to. So there are a lot of possibilities here, because there's the issue of Somaliland security, there's the issue of an Ethiopian navy, there's a issue of how would the Somaliland Navy benefit? What would be entailed in training? How would Somaliland security, benefit from this? So all of this has to be done by your leadership, and then it has to be considered.
I'd like to, like Siham and Abdel Nasser, if you have questions for the ambassador, please go right ahead. Don't let me hog the whole thing by myself, and then we'll actually a couple of questions that we've actually gotten from the audience. But go ahead and ask the ambassador if you have any questions about what we've been discussing.
Ambassador, I have one question for you. What would this mean for other parties that are interested in? Saeed, can you please mute? We're getting a lot of echoing and feedback from your end. Inna lillah. Not me. I mean, mute yourself. Sorry.
Go ahead. Apologies.
And Ambassador, my question is, what would this mean for other countries like the U.S. who are interested in forging, diplomatic relationship with Somaliland? Would this encourage other countries to step forward and really be open to taking that step this time?
Yeah, we'll have to see how it plays out, because in the United States, our domestic politics are quite important in these kind of questions. But first of all, we have to see what is the actual deal going to be, because right now it's very indistinct. What kind of recognition will Ethiopia give Somaliland? When will it come about? There are different levels diplomatic recognition. So we'll just have to see where that goes. But I do remember when I was ambassador to Ethiopia, and I got to know your president, President Igal, of the day, and he shared with me his frustration over the lack of recognition for Somaliland, which was a fully functional country that stood on its own 2 feet. And I absolutely sympathized with his frustration. And at the time, I asked around, and it seemed like there were a number of countries kind of waiting in the wings who would be willing to recognize Somaliland if another country recognized Somaliland. So we'll see how this plays out, but right now it seems very, very positive. But let's not make anything of it until something actually happens.
So I do have a question, and this time maybe on so for example, Ethiopia, it's a pretty important country, not only in the context of the world, but within the African context. It's the home of the African Union, member of the United Nations. Do you think they can risk that international standing by going ahead and, with a deal of this type with Somaliland? Or can you foresee any international pressure that actually may force Ethiopia to kind of stand down or withdraw from its possible agreement with Somaliland on a naval base and such?
I hope not, because Ethiopia has a record of looking after its own interests and of basically, when the international community is unhappy about something Ethiopia does, Ethiopia has a tendency to say, thank you very much for your opinion, but we're going to do what's in Ethiopia's interest. And, I personally hope that that's what happens this time, because Ethiopia, with diplomatic recognition from Ethiopia, would be very, very significant for Somaliland, because, as you said, the African Union, or the initial Organization of African Unity, was put in Addis Ababa because of Ethiopia's glorious history as, frankly, the only country in sub-Saharan Africa which had not been colonized by Europeans. So, Ethiopia is, with recognition from Ethiopia, I have to say it would be extremely, extremely significant and a very positive move for Somaliland.
Now, so like a lot of there's been a lot of noise coming from, our neighbors to the south, Somalia, or more specifically the federal, government of Somalia. And they seem to have actually gone ballistic and launched a severe diplomatic offensive against Ethiopia, while also whipping up an anti-Ethiopian nationalism, like basically getting, people to say, you need to oppose this code from the president by any means necessary. At the same time, ignoring that there is a large contingent of Ethiopian troops actually deployed in many parts of Somalia as part of the ADMIS mission. Do you think Somalia's rhetoric will lead to Ethiopia withdrawing its peacekeeping forces from Somalia? And if they do, how would such a move impact the fight against Shabaab, the security of Somalia, and the entire region?
No, I don't think that to me is a totally separate issue, because again, countries do what is in their interest, and as long as Ethiopia decides that it is in their security interest to maintain forces in Somalia to, combat al-Shabaab, then they're going to, maintain that. I found it interesting that when this whole port deal came up, there was an initial flurry of, a lot of countries, including the United States, saying, oh, we all support the territorial integrity of Somalia. But it was kind of what I would say is a one-shot deal. There's been not much follow-up. So, I'm optimistic that the opposition, except from Somalia, will probably be subdued. And I think hopefully people will get used to this concept.
Thank you, Master. Siam, Abdinasser?
Yes, I have a question. Ambassador, Somalia is a failed state as we know it, has been a failed state since we joined them since 1960. Their last election was in 1967. Somaliland government as a whole, Somali government as a whole has no jurisdiction over Somaliland, and Somaliland will never accept to be part of the federal model. And Somaliland was never part of the federal model. In fact, the model that Somaliland was part of no longer exists. So how can Somalia claim Somaliland or claim to represent Somaliland or have any sort of legitimacy over bilateral deals that Somaliland goes into with neighboring countries?
Yeah, well, you can ask them how they think that they have a right to that. In my point of view, they have no rights whatsoever. Anybody who looks at the history of the issue, it's fairly clear cut. I mean, in many respects, the Somaliland issue has parallels to Eritrea. Eritrea had a colonial legacy. Ethiopia did not. And when the two countries are joined together, it was never a marriage made in heaven. And when the Derg was chased out of Ethiopia by both the Eritrean liberation forces and the Tigrayans, the Amharas, and the other liberation forces, Eritrea decided to go its own way because of its different legacy and different history from Ethiopia. And it's parallel situation. Somaliland had a totally different colonial history than Somalia, Mogadishu. And you guys tried a marriage. It certainly was not a marriage made in heaven, and you decided to end it. So I personally don't see where Somalia has any rights whatsoever to raise a fuss.
Thank you, Ambassador. In your experience, experience in foreign services, do you recall a similar example where countries aspiring for statehood, say Kosovo, were recognized by friendly countries without resorting to the United Nations or regional bodies or organizations? In other words, like countries directly recognizing other countries because of mutual understanding of or benefit or exchange of like what have you. Do you recall anything like that?
Yeah, I think one of the examples is right on the other side of Africa, which is Western Sahara or the Saharan Arab Democratic Republic, which initially, it self-declared independence. Some countries recognized it, others did not. And there's still a controversy going on because it's been incorporated into Morocco. Algeria certainly has not accepted that. So yeah, there are other prime examples. I mean, and then you look across at the ocean to the greatest example, which is Taiwan. There is this quote unquote one China policy that everybody looks at, but in fact, Taiwan acts like an independent country. And we'll see how the Taiwanese elections come out to see where the history of that will go forward. And then the example I cited before which is the country of Eritrea, which it went by the book because at the time Ethiopia supported the concept of Eritrean independence because it was obvious that 99% of the people in Eritrea supported that. And it would be so much easier if Somalia, took the same course that Ethiopia did with Eritrea and just accepted reality that Somaliland is a separate, independent country and is not going back into sharing a household with Somalia.
Ambassador, just to reiterate a point, Somaliland is not succeeding from Somalia. All of those, there was a report that the African Union did about Somaliland on 2005 that Somaliland is a unique case in that it's not seceding from Somalia; it's reclaiming its independence.
Right.
Its independence territory from 1960 borders. So Somaliland is different from all these other cases that you mentioned in the sense that it was a country that reunited with Somalia, just like Gambia and Senegal, and has the right to reclaim its independence, reclaim its recognition, and reclaim its 1960 borders. So it's different in that case. Just for you, I know you know this, but it's for the audience.
Yeah, it's important to not use the word secession. It was more a dissolution of the joining. It was not, stepping out.
Ambassador, just following up on that question of countries sort of finding mutually beneficial, like interest in actually recognizing one another that way. In the current memorandum of understanding, one of the things, and this was mentioned by both President Bihi and Ridwan Hussein, the National Security Counselor of Prime Minister Abiy, recognition seems to be a big component of this memorandum understanding and hopefully potential agreements that come out of this. Let's say if Ethiopia recognizes Somaliland once a deal is finalized, do you foresee other countries following suit? In other words, Ethiopia being like a big domino?
I absolutely think so. It may not be immediate. It may be step by step of building international recognition. But I think, you look in Hargeisa. When I was in Hargeisa, I was quite pleasantly surprised at the number of other countries that had diplomatic representation there. So you look at those countries that have diplomatic representation, and it's very easy to switch a diplomatic establishment from, being a consulate or what's called a principal office or a liaison office to an embassy. So yeah, the one thing I would say is it's going to be a process. It's not going to be like switching on a light bulb, but with Ethiopian recognition, assuming that it comes, it would be a tremendous step forward because a number of other countries then would feel much, much more comfortable about upgrading their diplomatic representation. And there might even be some competition because Somaliland has an awful lot to offer, other countries. So no, it's an extremely positive step.
And just a quick follow up, and obviously, you do understand the view from Washington, and like the general thinking there. Would you think the United States would be one of those countries, like again way down the road, obviously, because this is an issue for the regional players. But again, in all fairness, the United States is also seeking for a potential military base in Berbera. Now, should Somaliland actually kind of, hold the Washington's feet to the fire and say, well, you know what, just like Ethiopia, I need a little bit more out of this, and potentially kind of put that in any agreement, to place U.S. troops in Somaliland to actually be able to get a base in Berbera.
Yeah, here's the deal. In Washington, there is not unity on this position. The current administration refers to what's called the One Somalia policy, which when I was Assistant Secretary of State, I do not know where this comes from formally because I have never seen a document, that describes a quote unquote One Somalia policy. And different executive agencies in Washington also have different views. But at the end of the day, it's the U.S. president who is responsible for U.S. foreign policy. As you know, we have an election coming up in November. So depending on how that election comes out, there might be a totally different view of the Horn of Africa coming in with the new administration. So, I can't speak for the current administration. I certainly cannot speak for a future administration, but people have to understand that in Washington, there are many points of view, including with Congress. So again, if Ethiopia provides formal diplomatic recognition to Somaliland, that would be a kind of a huge, coin on the scale in favor of eventual American recognition.
Thank you, Ambassador. But actually do so. I have a question from one of our audience, and that is a gentleman by the name of Hamza Khairi. He's actually a member of Somaliland's, opposition party, Wadani. And here's his question: in the context of the recent Ethiopian-Somaliland Memorandum of Understanding and its implication for the regional dynamics, how might this agreement impact international community's perception and potential recognition of Somaliland?
Well, that's what we've been talking about. Already, in my view, it upgrades the positive image of Somaliland, because people are saying, wow, Ethiopia is making a deal with Somaliland. I mean, let's be honest. I would gather that probably 80% of American public has never heard of Somaliland, and they probably couldn't distinguish between Somaliland and Somalia. And I don't know what the statistics would be in Europe, but around the world, all of a sudden, people are saying, wow, okay, what does this mean? People might go to a map and say, oh, wait a minute, here's this fairly small country, but it has an 800 kilometer shore on the Red Sea. And we've been hearing all about the Red Sea and the importance of how much shipping goes through there, and on and on and on. So already, in my view, this is a very positive step. Like I said, a lot has to be worked out. No deal is final until it has been signed, but the memorandum of understanding is a very, very positive step.
Thank you, Ambassador. I mean, it's not just Somaliland and Somalia and Ethiopia, right? Like, there's also other regional players, like namely Egypt, which has actually seems to have actually come against, the memorandum of understanding, reaffirmed their commitment to Somalia's territorial integrity and all of the usual hoopla. What do you think is Egypt's problem with this deal? I mean, this is between two countries that are neighbors. I mean, we get it. It's like maybe Ethiopia is gaining a geostrategic, advantage that it did not have before by accessing the Red Sea. But how do you see the Egyptians actually influencing this, and would this even encourage Prime Minister Abiy even more to get this deal kind of finalized and going?
Well, here again, we have to distinguish different issues, because Egypt's problem is not Somaliland. Egypt's problem is Ethiopia and the disagreement between the two countries over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. For Egypt, as we all know, the Nile is an existential issue. For decades, even centuries, Egypt has been in they have been the higher power on the Nile. There was always this feeling that Egypt has an entitlement to 100% of the Nile waters, whereas now the power dynamic has shifted somewhat because Ethiopia has come up in the world. So, the Egyptians are having real problems accepting this new geopolitical reality. So that is Egypt's problem. If Egypt and Ethiopia make a deal on the GERD, on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, then I suspect that their opposition would kind of go away.
Thank you, Ambassador. Sam, the floor is yours.
Ambassador, on the issue of Egypt, we know Egypt once was on a union with Syria and dissolved that union. Don't you find that hypocritical that Egypt does not respect, quote unquote, Somalia's territorial integrity and we know why? It's for we know it's not about Somaliland, but don't you find it hypocritical that they are not allowing Somaliland to have to have that for themselves?
Well, I hate to say this, but part of every country's foreign policy is hypocritical. You show me one country that does not have any hypocrisy in its foreign policy, and I will be amazed. So, to answer your question, yeah, the union between Egypt and Syria was very, very short-lived. It was a very unique period of time in both of those countries' history, and there was nothing natural about that union beyond ideology, and those kind of unions never seem to work. So like I said, at some point, Egypt and Ethiopia have to come to an agreement on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and after that, I think, once they have friendly relations again, the Egyptian worldview will be much different than it is now.
Ambassador, I want to ask a question from another one of our audience who's actually all the way from Australia. He was complaining about the timing because apparently it's 3 a.m. his time. And he actually did ask something like 3 questions, but in the interest of being fair, we're only going to pick one. So he's asking, isn't Somaliland's recognition a common interest of both countries of Ethiopia and Somaliland? Doesn't the recognition of Somaliland make Ethiopia's legal position stronger in the face of Somalia's opposition and claim of territorial claim over Somaliland?
Yeah, obviously yes, but as I said, Ethiopia is going to be acting out of what Ethiopia sees as its own self-interest. Now, what would happen is if Ethiopia, finally recognizes Somaliland, other countries recognize Somaliland, there would be a force building within the African Union to finally recognize Somaliland. Somaliland then gets admitted to the United Nations, as a member, and on and on and on. So, with that kind of momentum, yes. But at this stage, Ethiopia is going to do what Ethiopia thinks it's in its interest. Ethiopia has decided it absolutely needs to have a long-term commitment for a port. Ethiopia, once upon a time, had quite a significant navy, so they want to have the navy again. They want to bolster their own security and their own chances for prosperity. So, at this point, that's really not an issue as to, how legal or not in the eyes of, others that would the deal would matter. Because, let's be honest about it. Somaliland is a functioning de facto state, which may be one of the more successful nations in the Horn of Africa, full stop.
Oh, go ahead, Said.
No, Siham, go ahead, please. I apologize.
I guess my question is, as you've been following the news, Somalia and Somalians have been having meltdown about this MoU, and even suggesting to, transport terrorism to, threatening Somaliland and Ethiopia to transport terrorism if this deal moves forward. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that I don't know what capabilities Somalia actually has, because if we look at the overall Somalia security situation, they have been unable up to now to to provide for their own domestic security and stability. So, for them to be threatening other countries is somewhat incredulous in my view.
Including Ethiopia. Ethiopia is one of those countries that provide Somalia, troops that help support their. So it's just it doesn't add up that they are threatening a country that supports their internal. But I will give the floor to Said. Said, go ahead.
No, actually, that's exactly what my next question was going to be centered around. Now, the international community and mainly the United States mission or embassy to Somalia has been a big proponent of not only the one Somalia, like successive ambassadors. I've actually personally interviewed, the former ambassador Andre, and he was pretty adamant about one Somalia, and right, and obviously, understandably so, because he is the United States ambassador to Somalia. Now, is Somaliland doing itself a disservice by actually dealing with and accepting ambassadors that were actually sent, to the neighboring country of Somalia, by kind of making it look like indistinguishable or sort of not serious about its case for recognition?
See, okay, that is an excellent question. And that is definitely a consideration for the Somaliland government, because I have seen other situations where a country will be very unhappy if the ambassador is based in, say the Asmara, Eritrea, say would be, well, there was the Ethiopian War, would have been very unhappy if an ambassador accredited to Eritrea was actually resident in Addis Ababa. So that's that's definitely something for for your government to decide, with the consideration. Then wait a minute, if we say that we will not accept the U.S. ambassador that's based in Mogadishu, then the question comes up, well, what if the United States then says, okay, if you want to feel that way about it, then we're not going to have anybody, who's going to be making trips to Hargeisa. So, that just has to be decided on where the priorities are. If a country is very self-confident, that it might say, no, we're not going to accept an ambassador that is accredited to, to another country. But that is absolutely an excellent question, because American ambassadors in Mogadishu have to reflect what the president's official foreign policy is. So even though the U.S. ambassador to Somalia is in fact the U.S. ambassador to Mogadishu airport, and if a U.S. ambassador comes to Hargeisa, they can travel literally almost all over the country. Still, if the U.S. official policy is a, quote unquote, one Somalia policy, then the U.S. ambassador has to, voice that policy.
Just to follow up on that, Ambassador, do you've been following the Somaliland talks that have been going on for the past 12 to 15 years, I think. We all know that the talks have been, fruitless, because Somaliland is country in every sense possible, but Somalia is not. So that, like Adna said earlier, that has been one of the reasons which the talks have been dragging. But my question is, do you think Somalia has been using the talks to drag Somaliland's recognition and kind of, make it seem like Somalia is ready for a legitimate resolution with Somaliland, but on a bad faith, just dragging it so Somaliland doesn't get its case to other countries?
Well, those kind of talks, in my view, are talks that are not ever going to lead anywhere, but the two countries kind of have to participate in them, because I can't imagine Somalia at this stage ever saying, okay, we accept the fact that Somaliland is an independent country, and I can certainly not expect Somaliland ever to say, oh, okay, we accept the fact that theoretically we are a part of Somalia. But, sometimes people have talks just to have talks so that the rest of the world doesn't think that they're going to be intransigent. But, you have to ask your own government and the Mogadishu participants as to how much goodwill and honesty there is in their discussion and what their actual objectives are.
Thank you, Ambassador. I do have a question from one of our audience who's actually based out of Addis Ababa. And his question is, what's the view like? Again, you've already, mentioned that the fact that you can't really speak for this government, right? But let me throw it at you anyway. He's basically saying, what's the view? In other words, like in Washington's view of this MoU, despite the sort of non-answer from the State Department's spokesman, and simply evoking the, territorial integrity of Somalia. Like, in other words, in what sense, in Washington's view, like you said, is Somaliland actually a part of Somalia when no Somali president has set, foot, since it's, regaining its independence?
Yeah, well, as I said, the official view of this administration, I mean, you have to talk to them. I cannot speak for this administration. But what they have said is that they support a one Somalia policy. But then if you look under the surface, you look in various congressional offices and staffers, and you talk to people at the Pentagon and, even some people in the State Department, at the National Security Council, then you find out that that view is definitely muted. But at the end of the day, you have to go with what the official view is that is stated. But again, that is the view on Somalia. I have not heard anybody in Washington actually criticize Ethiopia, and I doubt if I will. So we'll just have to see what happens.
On that, so earlier, when your answer to one of the questions was, I mean, Washington is not monolithic, right? It's not, one giant entity that moves, and this is, maybe just one of the hallmarks of democracy. There's many, actors that are actually involved. There has been some, amendments, the one by Senator Risch to include Somaliland in, various activities of, DOD. Do you think at some point, like in other words, is the United States, kind of looking for a base in Berbera, because there has been, some movement on that front while they're present in Djibouti, obviously. But again, is this, something that is that do you think that the United States will actually benefit in making sure that that actually it has a base in Somaliland because of its strategic position?
Yeah, you're asking a theoretical question, because again, that's going to be up to the administration that's in power to decide what direction they want to go in. But if you ask it philosophically, it is absolutely in the interest of the United States of America to make agreements with many countries, for access to port facilities, because the United States is a global power. And unfortunately, sometimes the United States does not appreciate the value of smaller countries, even though smaller countries oftentimes are much easier to deal with than larger countries. I mean, you can look around the world and see the value of small countries. Like, who would not want to have an apartment in Singapore or in Dubai? Or if you have the choice between buying, a house in Germany or Switzerland, I think most people would opt for Switzerland. So small countries offer an awful lot of value when it comes to making deals like that.
Thank you, Ambassador. I really appreciate it, Siham. I will give you the last question, and we'll close it out. To give the ambassador his time back. This has been an amazing discussion. We hope to do a couple of more of these, hopefully, with folks like the ambassador who have actually been in situations where like this is the kind of stuff that they've actually done. And so Siham, go ahead and if you can, if you want to bring up one or two people so they can ask the questions.
And I do have to go very soon.
All right, let's make that the last question, Siham.
I guess, Ambassador, you've made it very clear that you don't speak for the current government of the U.S., but so my last question is, in general, what's the U.S.'s position on Somaliland recognition in general?
Well, in general, I have to say that the United States has been very reluctant to get into that issue because the United States, you look around the world, it has what I would call a hierarchy of interests, and frankly, up till now, the issue of Somaliland has been very, very much. It has not even been what we would call on the back burner of the stove, but it's been off the stove. Because there are just so many other issues that push it out of the way. I mean, even around the Horn of Africa, there was a terrible conflict in Tigray. Ethiopia still has some very, very major problems. You have now the civil war in Sudan. You have the ongoing conflict in Somalia. And that was one of the big frustrations of then President Igal when I first got to meet him, because this was shortly after September 11th, 2001. And President Igal said that he was ready to have cooperation, security cooperation with the United States. And I said, Mr. President, Somaliland doesn't have any security problems, so we really don't have cause to have a security relationship with Somaliland. And he was so frustrated. He said, you mean if I had a terrorism problem and if terrorists were running around Somaliland, then the United States would have a security relationship with me? And I said, yes. So in some respects, Somaliland has been its own enemy in making such a good case of standing on its own 2 feet, of having one of the more democratic systems in place in the region, of being self sufficient, of not having its hand out to the international community like Somalia has, which has received billions and billions of dollars from the international community, which has been largely wasted. So, you know, there are those of us in Washington who want to reward success. So there is hope that maybe after our elections, there will be a totally new look given to Somaliland, and people will recognize the tremendous value of your country, which I call it the little country that can, which brings to the table, not just in the region, but on the continent, and actually, frankly, worldwide.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We really appreciate it. Hopefully we could do this again sometime. We have, over, a bunch of people that really wanted to ask questions. But again, hopefully next time we can get the full hour. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much, everyone. And that would be it. See you until next time.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.
Thank you. All right, bye.
guys. Take care.
Thank you. All right, bye.